Good evening. Today is the 9th day of January 2023, and we're back for an all-new season of the Hamilton Report. I'm very happy that you are with us this evening. We've got a lot to discuss tonight, especially about the insanity going on the other side of the aisle. It doesn't stop in Washington, though. It comes right back home, and unfortunately, that means we're all going to be haunted by craziness this year. All that and more on tonight's Hamilton Report. Well, as I said, we're off to a very interesting year so far. And some of the things that I've seen in the last week frighten me as a Democrat, but more so frighten me as an American. The things that we saw play out on the floor of the United States Congress last week was absolutely unthinkable. We're going to talk more about that and also what it means for us here in Oklahoma. But first, I want to take a look at something that our friends at the Lincoln Project put together. They do a fine job, and I'm always happy to share their work with you. And tonight, we're going to look at last year in the Republican Party, according to the Lincoln Project.
First, we're not a cult.
There is a demonic portal, a satanic portal above the White House.
There was ketchup dripping down the wall.
And all of a sudden, I feel a shot on my back, like somebody shot me.
I'm not going to cower. I'm not going to run from you.
Hey, we're going to have kind of a sexual get-together at one of our homes. You should come.
Oh, my God.
I was on crack.
Right. By the way, you can pick up a butt plug or a dildo at Target.
Celebrate Father's Day with the best meat America has to offer.
I've never been an escort for Senator Ted Cruz.
My pronoun is kiss my ass.
My pronouns are Trump 1.
My pronouns are Reagan and Trump.
My pronouns are let's go Brandon.
2 words for you. Joe Biden is a freaking idiot.
Biden, where's your Build Back Better, motherfucker?
Are you ready to be called a racist?
White supremacy, which, I condone. I condemn.
Actually, I'm not mad at black people.
I don't care if Herschel Walker paid to abort endangered baby eagles.
Stand by Herschel tonight.
I am what with many police officers.
I have trained with the FBI.
That's $20 for crudité, and this doesn't include the tequila.
I'm going to win the election, and I will accept that result.
If they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all. See that Democrat go ding?
So many people voted on issues that weren't the issues we thought they were voting on.
You think Princess Diana is still alive?
Absolutely.
There's not a lot of job market for queer pet literature.
How did you know that President Trump...
Well, there might be somebody else I'd prefer more.
The orange M&M does appear very anxious.
You can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it.
Donald's the only boy that can straighten it out, I'll tell you that.
I actually saw people trying to leave, and people leaving early even before he was done. He's still speaking now. And then they, I think perhaps a little concerned that the hall would empty out too much. They actually started preventing people from leaving. So now they're no longer allowing people to leave.
Friends, you cannot make this kind of thing up. This is what the other party has been up to last year. Well, let's move it forward and see what happened last week. Like many of you, I watched with great anticipation through not one vote or 2 or 3, but 15 votes before a speaker could be elected. And that's an awful lot of work to elect someone whose very, very thin legislative record. Let's talk about how thin, in fact, it is. In his 15 years in Congress, he has been the lead sponsor of 10 pieces of legislation that made it into law. And 4 of those were to rename federal office buildings. That leaves only 11 of his bills out of 15 years to see the light of day. That's not much of a legislator. What's more, he can't be trusted. He lied about January 6th. He lied about supporting Trump, then not supporting Trump, and then supporting him again. I'm not going to spend a lot of effort on this other than to say, for a handful of ultra-right mega maggots to hold our country hostage does not portend well for the next 2 years in our Congress. One of the very first things, the very first pieces of legislation that they're going to do is vote to defund the FBI. Now, the FBI is our largest law enforcement agency in the United States. They are responsible for solving some of the biggest crimes committed in our country. But the Republicans are mad because they did their job in the same way that they've done their job in years before. It's the same FBI that went through Hillary's emails over and over and over and still found nothing. So this is not a partisan group. These are law enforcement professionals. But the Republicans are mad and they want to defund them by billions and billions of dollars. It's funny that so often Americans don't take the words, the promises of politicians to heart. Well, we know that there's a good reason for that because most of those political promises are not kept. But sadly, one of the promises that they've made in the last election is one that you can count on them keeping. And that is the reduction and eventual elimination of Social Security and Medicare. If you've worked at any point in your life, you have paid into Social Security and Medicare. It's a safety net for our aging years. For most Americans, though, it's not a safety net. It is a means of survival. And they're talking about reducing it and eventually eliminating it. That's something that should concern every American, regardless of age. If you're a young person, you might think, well, I've still got 40 years before I need to think about that. That is true unless you're prepared to take care of your aging parents or grandparents as soon as they quit getting the monthly check that they paid into for decades. I started paying Social Security tax when I was 14 years old. I know many of our viewers started working young and are still working today, still paying into something that may or may not be there. But as I said, that was the position that many of these people held. All the while, they make considerably more than the average American with lifetime benefits, pension, healthcare, things that people like you and I honestly just don't get. So we have some big problems ahead in Washington. And perhaps nowhere was that more starkly displayed than when President Biden honored true American heroes, giving them the Civilians Medal, which is the highest medal awarded to civilians in this country. Sadly, some of those were presented posthumously because some of the people who worked to protect the Capitol on January 6, 2 years ago, died as a result of that. But in the gathering to remember these heroes, the Democrats turned out in force, and one Republican, one person from the Republican Party dared to break ranks and join them in that moment of reflection and celebration. Of course, I don't need to tell you that none of our elected congressional representatives could be bothered to be there. They were too busy working the back rooms, trying to get the best deals for themselves, I'm sure, because they weren't doing anything for Oklahomans or the American people. Now, these are crazy times, because if we think about where we were even a few years ago under President Obama, leaving office with a a growing economy, growing jobs market, when things were well established to move us into a tremendous trajectory. And all that unfolded under the last former failed president, who, if there is a silver lining in what happened last week, we proved with pretty substantial evidence that he has lost his sway over the Republican Party. But things now are out of control. Do you remember when President Obama was elected? Mitch McConnell said he was going to make it his personal agenda that no matter what, he was not going to seat any judges on the Supreme Court, justices on the Supreme Court, and would do everything he could to block the appointment of judges around the country. And he stuck to that. But now we have a lot more people energized in a very, very sad way. To give you a sense of just how crazy things have become on the other side of the aisle, this weekend, Lauren Boebert called Marjorie Taylor Greene unhinged. Now, if that's not the pot calling the kettle black, I don't know what is. But these two frenemies butted heads on the floor last week, over and over and over again. All about position, all about positioning, all about getting more power for themselves. This had nothing to do for the betterment of our citizenry in this country. And imagine how we looked on the world stage last week, round after round after round, to say nothing of what it meant for our national security, to have an unfunctioning Congress. Well, now we have Speaker McCarthy for the moment. As you know now, all it takes is one person to call for his ouster, and it goes up for a vote. So we could be back to this same old over and over and over process of voting and voting and voting very soon. And it frankly wouldn't surprise me if it happens within the first month of his term. Nancy Pelosi said that she had had the privilege of working with some very talented, dedicated people under Republican and Democratic presidents, leadership under both houses. And she said, but this man is just not qualified for the job. He's not fit for it. And I agree. But let's look at what's happening in Oklahoma, or rather to Oklahoma, if you will. As you may know, President Biden, on his way to Mexico for an official state visit, a conference with North American leaders, immigration is a key priority. And he stopped on the U.S.-Mexico border and examined for himself what the Republicans have been calling a migrant crisis. Well, we have a bit of a crisis here with our own Senator James Lankford, senior senator from Oklahoma. This man has been to the border more times than he has held town hall meetings in his home state. He's passionate about running there and being in front of the camera and flailing his arms and tisk-tisking everything. Well, you'll love this. He accused President Biden of going to the border today for a photo op. Now, that's rich, because that's all Lankford has done in the time that he's been in office. If you recall, he was the one about to speak 2 years ago on January 6th when the riot occurred. That's the only reason that he stopped speaking, because he was prepared to not vote for the duly elected president of the United States, Joe Biden. Okay, how does all of this translate into what we're dealing with right here at home? Well, frankly, in a lot of ways, because this MAGA group is intent on pushing states' rights, moving things back to state control. As you know, in Oklahoma, we have a Republican governor, a majority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate, giving them a supermajority in our state. These people are not qualified to be making decisions for you, me, our children, our grandchildren, our communities. Some of the idiocy that we have already seen. We've seen hundreds of bills that are being introduced. The deadline is the 19th of this month, and they expect as many as 3,000 bills being presented. But some of the bills already that we've seen include the prohibition of putting fluoride in drinking water. Now, our own State Department of Health said that by fluoridating the water, we reduce tooth decay between 18 and 40%, depending on the age group. This is critical, especially for poor people in our state and especially for children. You don't have to spend much time on the streets of Oklahoma City or Tulsa or probably just about anywhere in the state to know that dental care is beyond the reach of many Oklahomans. The cost simply doesn't allow them to visit the dentist. By taking away fluoride, well, that's a huge disservice at best, and it's morally wrong. The legislator, I'm not even going to name him because I won't give him any airtime, but the one who's proposing this said, well, we don't know what it does to the body. Look, I've had virtually my whole life have had fluoride in my drinking water. I haven't grown gills. I haven't grown a second head. My head hasn't fallen off. We do know what happens when you put fluoride in the drinking water. It makes teeth better. There are no known side effects. That's why it's used so freely around the world. Let's look at some of the other legislation. We have a bill now that presumes that a 25-year-old person, an adult in every sense of the word, does not have sense enough for their own healthcare decisions. That's right, 25 years old. Now, at 18, you can sign up for the military. You can buy a gun. At 21, you can drink legally. This is insane. I'm sorry. I just needed to breathe for a moment. What this legislation says is that any doctor or medical provider, and by that includes psychologists, it includes psychiatrists, it includes therapists, that anyone that provides transgender care for a person under 26 years old is guilty of a felony. What's more, there's a 40-year statute of limitation on this. So someone who is counseling, someone who is questioning whether or not they are transgender, providing affirming health care to that person, 39 years from now, could still be arrested for that and sent to prison. Let's think for a moment. This kind of legislation, how many people does it affect in our state? Besides every single healthcare provider, it affects less than 1%, considerably less than 1% of Oklahomans. Why do we need this kind of legislation? We don't. We absolutely do not. We have two sitting legislators making rules, proposing legislation, and in 3 weeks we'll be voting on said legislation, who are awaiting trial on felony charges. Yeah, they're both Republicans. No one has called for them to step down, not the governor, not the head of the GOP in Oklahoma, not the Speaker of the House. It's a shame because you and I both know that if we had Democratic legislators who stood accused of a felony, they would be run out of the Capitol on a rail. It's this rules don't apply to us kind of thing. When the governor's kid was arrested in Guthrie for possession of a vehicle while under the influence of alcohol, with alcohol in his possession, the first thing he said was, the governor is my dad. And what wound up happening is the Oklahoma Highway Patrol escorted him from Guthrie back to Stillwater. And speaking of Stillwater, where he goes to school, he has a multitude of parking violations simply just because he thinks he's above the law. Even has a placard stating that he's there on official state business, which is not the truth. He was even seen trying to take off a boot from his truck. Vandalizing public property is what that's called. But again, the rules only apply to some, not to all of us in Oklahoma. Where does that leave us, friends? Where does that leave us? As we go into this school year, which starts tomorrow in virtually every district in Oklahoma, our teachers and our children are going into an education system that's ranked 48th in the nation. Now, let's put something in perspective. When Governor Brad Henry, the last Democratic governor, left office, our education was ranked 17th in the nation. Not bad. 17th in the nation. I would love to have that today. But under 2 terms of Mary Fallon and 1 of Kevin Stitt, we went from 17th to 48th. Why? It's because they have taken the lifeline funding away from public education. Well, we know that the fight that ensued last year over school vouchers, and we'll talk about that more another time. But I will say this, up for consideration is statewide sports betting. Now, I don't bet on sports because, frankly, I don't know enough to bet on. I don't know enough about sports to bet on them. But why are we doing this in a state that already suffers a disproportionate number of people with gambling problems? You know, the tribes have been really good about helping people with gambling problems. They offer referral and services. Sadly, we're being sold the same bill of goods. Oh, this will fund education. Isn't that what we were told when we passed liquor by the drink? Yes. Isn't that what we were told when we passed parimutuel betting? Yes. Isn't that what we were told about the lottery in Oklahoma? Yes. Why then are we 48th in education in this country? It just shows you that they have not been funding our education system appropriately. Now, step in to school vouchers, privatization of public education. Our state charter says that we must have a robust public education system. You know, it's as if that doesn't even exist because they are looking at ways of getting around it. And with the new superintendent of public instruction who was sworn in today, you can just guarantee that public education will suffer and eventually crumble under this leadership. Friends, this is a new year, and it's a year for us not to be silent. Yes, we had some disappointments last year. I did, you did, but we learned a lot. And one of the things we learned is that while Michelle Obama's advice, when they go low, we go high, was very appropriate for that time, it's not appropriate in Oklahoma now. We must be vigilant. We must hold these people accountable for their actions, for their inactions, for the things that they say and don't say, for the way that they pick on one minority group over another, the way that they are so invested in themselves and their own political career that they don't care about the people of Oklahoma. Yes, it's time to get busy and to start calling Speaker McCall right now and saying, hey, you've got two people who are waiting felony trials who are still making laws on behalf of Oklahoma. Stop it. Take them down now. I don't care if your state rep, state senator is a Republican or a Democrat. Every call you make is accounted for. So as Alicia Andrews, our chair, said this afternoon, they can't pretend that their constituents want this or that, or they haven't heard anything negative about this bill or that bill. Because if we pick up the phone, if we email their offices, if we make ourselves known as not standing for it anymore, then things will take a turn for the better. You know, I want to read this comment here, and I'm glad that Dee shared it. Once again, they are okay with getting rid of something that helps children, tell women what they can and can't do with their bodies, and create ridiculous laws that serve no purpose. That's exactly right. And we're going to see more stupid laws like naming highways after people who have been discredited and put out to pasture. We're going to see more nonsense about holding a greater bureaucracy for a party that believes in small government. The Republicans in Oklahoma keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger, but not for the good of the people. It's for their own good. I'm tired of it, and you should be tired too. More than that, it's not enough to be tired. We've got to be angry this year, a righteous anger, something that causes us to move into action. We can be angry with our words. We don't have to be violent. And believe me, I know violence isn't among the options that you're considering, but we can be loud. We may be small by comparison to the other party, but we must use our voices in our social media, in our conversations with friends, colleagues. We've got to let them know that we are tired of having the wool pulled over our eyes and that it's time for positive change, because we're not going to stand here and be the laughing stock of this country. Hell, would you bring your family to Oklahoma when our education is 48th in the nation? I wouldn't. We can do better, Oklahoma, and we have to. Whether your plans are to leave Oklahoma this year or in 10 years or to stay here the rest of your life, right now, this is home. This is where we live. And we have a responsibility to ourselves and to each other to join our forces. It's time to put aside petty differences. It's time for the tit and tat to stop within party politics. Instead, we need to show up as a galvanized force, believing that every Oklahoman deserves quality health care, that every child deserves quality education, that economic opportunity should not be out of reach for anyone living in this state. It's time for us to move. Friends, I know that was a lot for our first episode back this year, but it was a lot that I wanted to share with you to get you thinking, and I hope to get you riled up to action so that together we might continue our work toward making this a better place for every child, every woman, every man. We deserve that, and it's time for us to take it back. Next Monday is a holiday for most of us, but we will be here Monday evening, and I hope you'll join me when my guest will be Senator Reverend Dr. George Young. We're going to be exploring the question, is it possible for us to achieve Dr. King's dream? I have some real thoughts on how his name was used in horrible ways on the floor last week. But I want to hear what Dr. Young has to say. I hope you'll tune in next week, and I hope that you'll consider sharing this episode of the Hamilton Report, because the more people that hear us, the louder our voice becomes. Friends, thank you so much for allowing us into your home this evening. On behalf of all of us at the Oklahoma Democratic Party, I'm Scott J. Hamilton, thanking you for joining us. Have a safe week. Take good care of yourself. And I'll see you next Monday at 6:30. Good night.